I'm going to preface this by saying this is a highly sensitive topic, a graphic book concerning childhood sexual abuse, alleged childhood sexual abuse. So for anyone listening who is sensitive to this, I just want to give you fair warning. And again, the excerpts I'm going to be reading are quite graphic. I would like to just begin by saying, before I get into the book, that I take this topic extremely seriously. It is very personal to me. One of the closest people in my life, not myself, thank God, but is a survivor of sexual assault, and not once but twice as a young woman at a tender age. And so I take this stuff extremely seriously. And when something doesn't sound quite right to me, I also take it extremely seriously. And so we're going to have a discussion about a book that has gotten one kind of reception from celebrities and in the culture at large, and that is rapturous praise. It is called The Tell, and it's by a woman named Amy Griffin. Now, if you see her, anything about her or her book in magazines, on social media, you've probably seen clips of her maybe speaking to Oprah Winfrey, or, Instagram posts with Gwyneth Paltrow, or photos of her at various starry events with other starry people, or perhaps photographed with her husband. His name is John Griffin, and he is a billionaire, and he pretty much owns New York. And this is salient, and we will get to why. Now, The Tell is Amy's memoir of realizing, after a guided therapy session involving psychedelic drugs, or a psychedelic drug, that she had been sexually assaulted violently and repeatedly by a teacher at her school in her small town of Amarillo, Texas, when she was a child. She gives him a pseudonym, and she calls him Mr. Mason. And it is believed that Mr. Mason is an actual real person. Again, this is a pseudonym, who is living free and clear out in Amarillo. And we'll get into that as well. Now, Amy opens this book with a warning. And she says that it contains depictions of sexual assault. Reader discretion is advised. Please take care of yourself while reading, which I find strange. I don't think I've ever encountered a reader warning such as that, like to please take care of yourself. So anyway, we get to know a little bit of Amy before she gets to, the meat of her story. And she describes herself as just a girl from Texas who moves to New York. And she moves to New York, and there are parts of her personality that actually remind me quite a lot of Meghan Markle. She's a perfectionist. She writes, I was the school president. This is page 33. I was the school president, captain of the volleyball team, top 2% of her class. Then she becomes homecoming queen. But no, another girl gets elected homecoming queen. And these are traumas. Like she sort of perseverates on the stuff she didn't get in high school, which is, again, it's a strange thing to fixate on that. She talks about her first time having sex as an adult. And she says she's unaware that the guy she was having sex with wasn't wearing a condom. And that just strikes me as a woman as just completely unbelievable. Your first time having sex is typically fairly painful, and you would know the difference You would know the difference. She writes that she moved to New York as a huge Sex and the City fan, and she regarded herself as a potential Carrie. There are things that just, again, don't quite smack. Like, she gets a roommate. The roommate smokes weed, and this scandalizes her because drugs are illegal. But she goes on to write a book about these recovered memories that are induced by drugs that are going to potentially save her. And what she doesn't mention in this book, which is a very, very, very key piece of information that I think the reader should have access to, is that her husband is investing in psychedelic drugs, because there's this huge push now to bring them to the market and make them legal. But that's not here. She writes that she moved to the West Village, but she had never heard of Pride. I mean, this is like, we're talking in the 90s, I believe. I believe that Amy is a narcissist. And I'll tell you why. Because her mother develops breast cancer, and her mother gets about 2 lines about that, okay? Because not happening to Amy. Page 66, people often told me that I had the perfect life. I was athletic, tall, and blonde. The problem with Amy, I believe, is that despite being a perfectionist at school, and despite all of these achievements, she doesn't seem to feel special. She marries a billionaire. That's not enough. They have children, and within 4 pages, we're from babies to teenagers. Like, it's like that. Like really, really huge life events are just sort of skipped over. So at page 74, this is the thing that really set my alarm bells going. She writes that her 10-year-old daughter came to her and said, and I quote, "Mom, you're not a real person." Meaning, I took this to mean her daughter was like, "You're a phony, you're fake. Like, I'm your kid and I don't even know you. Like, the way you behave is really weird." So anyway, she decides, she writes on page 78. I wrote this down because it really, again, she writes, quote, "Multiple stories can be true at the same time." No, they cannot. They cannot. And with a book like this, you're either, again, this is tricky stuff to navigate because, this is an interesting moment in the culture because I really, when the Harvey stuff broke and then all these other bad men were outed, I really was a proponent of Me Too. And now we're seeing the pendulum swing. We saw it with the Diddy verdict, which I believe was the incorrect verdict. But we're seeing the culture say, hey, wait a minute, this stuff went way too fast. And do we believe all women? And I wonder if a book like this, which I don't know would have been published without this woman's husband's name and money and her celebrity friends and her celebrity life, because all too many women and girls have been victims of sexual violence. Men and boys too, of course, but it disproportionately affects women and girls. But her story is told in such a boilerplate, emotionless way. And then when she gets into realizing the abuse, the writing is really purple and overblown, and there are no specifics. There's nothing individual or personalized about it. And the thing about an Amy Griffin, and I have this on good authority, she came from nothing. She married this billionaire, and she uses a fair amount of her husband's money, and she invests in female-owned companies. And so she's in effect, in my opinion, just my opinion, buying these friendships with the Gwyneths of the world and the Sarah Blakeleys of the world and anybody and everybody famous that she wants to associate with, or, as I said on my show the other day, she's a scalp collector. scalping and hanging on the wall. I got Gwyneth, I got Oprah, Gail's probably up there. And this is why I think Oprah's a dangerous actor in the culture. I really do. Oprah, by the way, James Fry has a new book out, and she chose his book, A Million Little Pieces, years and years ago for her book club, when her book club was like one of the dominant entities in the culture. And it was billed as a memoir, and then it turned out that he had like fictionalized a lot of it, or a lot of it was fiction. And then she made him come back on her show with his editor, who I believe was the legendary Nan Talese. And she took him to the woodshed on her show. She embarrassed the guy in front of the entire country, because it was her fault that she got duped. Are you effing kidding me? And then we later learned that this was what publishing houses and editors and agents were doing back then. Memoir was the dominant genre, and he had tried to sell the book as a novel. And he was told, listen, if we just sort of recast this thing as a memoir, I mean, you're golden. You got a bestseller. And that's what they did. And everybody made a ton of money. Oprah. Okay. Anyway. And by the way, nobody was hurt. It was a novel / memoir about drug addiction. It was all about it. Okay, whatever. So I'm going to read part of this chapter 4, called Bathroom. And this is Amy now tripping under a supervised setting, but I don't think this is an actual doctor. It's not a physician, I don't think. Okay, here we go. I saw myself on the floor, on my stomach, and he, Mr. Mason, this is her younger self, I don't think we have an age here, was stepping on my back with his cowboy boot. Okay, so envision this. She's on the floor, on her stomach. His cowboy booted foot is on her back. Her back is bare. Where was my shirt? I was 12 years old. The rounded heel of his boot dug into the left side of my rib cage. I looked around the bathroom. She's in her school bathroom. His hand was on the nape of my neck, pressing my head against the wall. So we were on the floor, and now we're up against the wall. It's not really described. He grabbed me by my left arm and pulled me along the floor to the middle of the bathroom. His foot was on my back again. Okay. Then I was in Mr. Mason's classroom. It was early evening and still light outside. The frilly dress was pulled up over my head. I'm on page 90 now. And I was bent over a desk while he was raping me from behind. Next, this is again her psychedelic-induced recovered memory. I was in the girls' locker room with my hands on the metal locker, bent over at the waist. He was behind me. Could I be making it up? I asked. But I knew that I wasn't. So she's detailing 3 rapes in 3 public places in this small school, what I'm assuming is a small school. The girls' bathroom, I'm assuming it's the girls' bathroom, Mr. Mason's classroom, and then the girls' locker room. And you could say, well, maybe he locked his own classroom, but I don't know of any classrooms in elementary schools that don't have a glass window so you can see in, or a girl's bathroom or a locker room where presumably anybody could have walked in at any time. And if you want to say it happened after school hours, presumably there are janitors and other after school activities taking place. And so it just seems strange. And then she goes and she tells her husband, and he says to her, ultimately, I can't really be the conduit for this for you. But he is a billionaire, and he does say, oh, this is another recovered memory. where he, okay, this is page 101 to 102. She's still in school. We're still with Mr. Mason. She dragged herself to the gym to swim in the pool, knowing that the water would bring me comfort. As I crossed the surface, oh no, wait, sorry. This is the third day after the session. She's an adult. But she's got another intrusive, what she believes is a recovered memory. As I crossed the surface of the water, an image of a blue bandana flashed through my brain. At first, I couldn't place it. I realized then that I'd seen it before from Mr. Mason. He had used a blue bandana to tie my hands behind my back in the middle school bathroom. If you tell anyone, he said in a low Texas twang, I'll rip your teeth out. So we're talking about Amy Griffin's book is billed as a memoir of recovered memories of brutal sexual assault and rape. She's 12. This is a male teacher, an adult male teacher. Violent, I'll rip your teeth out. You know, the kind of violent assaults that I believe would send one to the emergency room or would leave marks, welts, bruises, or that would cause a child to act out in ways that would be alarming. She grew up in a good family, in a good home, by all accounts, by her account. Her parents weren't negligent. She was an overachiever. It's so her husband, John, says, listen, we have obviously they have the money. I'll hire a private investigator. I'll hire the best. Let's go do an in-depth dive on this guy. 2 weeks later, the report comes back and there's nothing in it. The guy is not a registered sex offender anywhere. There's no paper trail. There's no trail of other children. And I'm going to just say this also, I can't say who this child is, but how do I say this? Common sense dictates. When we were kids, when I was a kid, me, my friends, my relatives, my cohort, everyone in my school, we all knew who the creepy men were. We all knew who the likely sexual predators were, okay? There was a whisper network. I'll never forget, I had this choir teacher at church. And all the other kids in the choir would say, this was the whisper. Stay away from him. Don't get left alone with him. He's a pedophile. Don't get left alone. And I would think, kindly I'll just call him Mr. L. Kindly Mr. L, this older avuncular man. I don't buy it. One day I was left alone with him in church. I must have been 12. And we were in the up in the choir with the organ and everything. And my recollection is I was seated on the bench at the organ next to him. And he reached over and put his big, thick hand on my thigh. And I looked down at that, and I looked back at his face, and I looked down at his hand on my thigh, and I thought to myself, holy shit, it's true. And I got out of there immediately, and I never went back. So, and then there are others where, the whisper network grows into an alarm bell going off where parents will mobilize and kids will mobilize and say, that individual at school is creepy and get him out. He's touching kids inappropriately. He's trying to get kids to join him after school, doing improper things, giving them rides, offering them rides, whatever. So if there's a violent child rapist raping a 12-year-old student on school grounds in public areas, I'm going to guess there would be some sort of proof of that having happened. We all know that child predators, that sexual predators, the recidivism rate is extremely high. You cannot fix a pedophile. It's why there's such a thing as chemical castration. There's no treatment. So the report comes back empty. It's clean. And John says, I'm out. The husband says, I'm out. I'm done with this. But we have a book out now. And there's a real guy, apparently a real guy. It's a pseudonym in the book, but he's been accused of being a violent child rapist. Now, we at the Nerve, we reached out to Amy Griffin's person and said, hi, like we are doing a segment on Amy's book and we have some questions. And the main question was, even though the statute of limitations has, my opinion, just my opinion, it conveniently expired before the tell came out. So legally, there would be nothing one could do, right? But presumably, we've got a violent sexual predator roaming around free in a small Texas town. And you would think someone with Amy Griffin's money and resources and power and celebrity army would be on fire about that. You would think her husband, who could afford to hire ex-Mossad and ex-MI5, would have a small army devoted to uncovering other victims and naming and shaming this guy, protecting potentially other children. I mean, we literally asked that question that we put to Amy Griffin's person. We said, I mean, is she not worried that there might be other children who could fall victim to this most dangerous monster? We heard nothing. We heard nothing. So this is a book that has been swallowed whole by the media industrial complex and spat back out to you. And there is, on the other side of it, a guy who doesn't have Amy Griffin's money, power, resources, and who I'm going to guess in that town, and nobody would talk. The school wouldn't talk to us. People who went to school with Amy wouldn't talk to us. I mean, this book raises more questions than it answers. And if there is a guy on the other side of this who, you know, we talked about Lena Dunham's memoir the other day on the last show, actually, and the chapter in her book called Barry, in which she falsely accused an Oberlin student named Barry of rape. And she had to apologize to him. But that's it. Her book's still in print. She's still out there befouling the culture. I mean, I don't think that this isn't a harmless book. If what I'm thinking is potentially the case. So we'll see. We'll see if we hear anything back. But this segment just serves as yet another example of just be skeptical of what the media industrial complex and people like Oprah, who give their fucking rubber stamp to whatever's chic in the culture, you know, just be wary. That's just my opinion.